Hey guys, tonight we're taking a journey way back in time, to a place where the air hangs thick and still, and the first whisper of a story is just beginning to stir. Imagine you're standing at the edge of an endless, dark ocean. The water isn't cold or warm, it simply is. This is the primordial void, a limitless expanse of cosmic soup that the ancient Egyptians called none. Everything that ever was, is, and will be, is contained within this one vast, watery stillness. There are no stars, no sun, no earth beneath your feet, just the faint, distant lapping of waves in the dark. It's an almost unimaginable silence. A quiet so profound it would probably drive you absolutely batty in a few seconds, if not completely erase your mind. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you are right now and what time it is for you in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. From the heart of this great emptiness, a consciousness began to stir. Not a bang, not a flash, but a slow, deliberate unfolding. The myth tells us that the god Autumn was the first to emerge, a self-created being who rose from the waters. Historians still argue whether Autumn and Ra were the same entity in the earliest myths, or if Autumn was a more abstract concept of primordial existence. Either way, this divine being felt a deep, profound loneliness. In the immense quiet, a single thought blossomed, and with that thought, a word. This word created the very first thing that wasn't none, a single, dry mound of earth. This was the Benben, the primeval hill that rose from the waters and became the foundation for everything that would follow. Think of it as the original high ground, the one spot where you could finally sit down and get your bearings. This is a very different idea from, say, the Mesopotamian creation story, where the world is formed from the body of a slain goddess. Here, it's a process of internal creation, a god breathing reality into existence from nothing but thought. Now, from this mound, our main character arrives, the sun god, Ra. Some myths say he was born from a lotus flower that bloomed on the Benben. Others, that Autumn transformed into Ra, the full manifestation of the divine light. However he got there, Ra was a busy god. You had to be when you're the only one around. He was the ultimate creative force. His first act? He decided to get a little company. With a mighty effort, he sneezed or coughed. It depends on which version of the tale you hear, and out came Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. You can just imagine the scene. The two of them blinking into existence, probably a little damp, and wondering what just happened. Shu and Tefnut, in turn, produced Jeb, the god of the earth, and Nut, the goddess of the sky. Can you picture that? Jeb and Nut were locked in an eternal, loving embrace until Shu, the air between them, had to push them apart so there would be space for the rest of creation. That's a pretty heavy-duty family intervention, right? But Ra wasn't done. The very moment he spoke a word, something came into being. When he said, "Earth," the land formed. When he spoke the names of animals and plants, they sprang to life. He was a cosmic linguist, and every syllable was a new species. His tears, shed for his children lost in the primordial void, turned into humanity. Yes, you and I are literally made of the tears of a sun god. Kind of a beautiful, and slightly depressing, thought. This initial age was a golden time. Ra ruled directly over the earth, not from some distant throne room, but right here, among the people he had created. This era of divine rule is a central tenet of Egyptian thought, where the pharaohs later claimed to be the direct descendants of the gods. Continuing this perfect reign, they believed their rule was a continuation of this initial divine order, a concept called Ma'a, which we'll get to later. But for now, just know that Ra was in charge. The world was fresh, and everything was in its right place. It was a perfect, peaceful beginning. Of course, perfect things rarely last, do they? As Ra ruled over his creation, time began to pass. He grew old, and like any old ruler, he started to get a little out of touch. His joints creaked, his divine eyes weren't what they used to be, and he was no longer as spry as he once was. The humans he had wept into being started to notice. They whispered in the shadows, complaining about his long, slow journey across the sky and the way the world seemed to be slowing down with him. They forgot that their very existence was a gift. and they started to plot against him. It was a classic case of ungrateful children thinking they know better. Ra, however, was a god of light, but he wasn't a god of ignorance. He heard their traitorous whispers. He felt their disrespect like a chill wind on his aged skin. He was furious. His rage boiled, a silent heat that radiated across the land. He gathered his children, Shu, Tefnut, Jeb, and Nut, as well as other early gods like Nun, the primordial abyss, and told them of his plan. "Look at my people," he said, his voice a low rumble of thunder. "They hate me. They plot to overthrow me. What should I do?" The gods were silent. They knew Ra was right, and they knew his fury was justified. It was Nun, the wise, dark waters from which everything came, who finally spoke. "Your eye," Nun suggested. "Let it be the instrument of your will. Let it go forth and punish them." Now, this isn't just his literal eyeball. The eye of Ra is a powerful, separate entity, a feminine force of divine protection and righteous fury. It's a very common motif in Egyptian mythology. You can see depictions of it everywhere in ancient art. The Eye of Horus is probably the most famous. But the Eye of Ra is the original. This is a crucial distinction and one that can get a little confusing. Kind of like trying to explain the difference between a scone and a biscuit to someone who's only had one of them. Ra's eye, which had been a symbol of his power and his divine watchfulness, now detached itself from him. It transformed. It became the goddess Hathor, but not the serene, cow-headed goddess of love and music you might know. This was Hathor in her fiercest, most destructive form, a lioness, a force of vengeance with a thirst for blood. Ra unleashed her upon humanity with a single command: punish them. And so, the great slaughter began. The lioness goddess descended, and the fields, once filled with people who had dared to rebel, were now filled with terror. She tore through the land, her roar shaking the very heavens, her claws carving a path of destruction. Humanity, in their foolishness, had brought this upon themselves. They were utterly unprepared for the wrath of a god, especially one so powerful and so personally insulted. One mainstream historical fact is that the goddess Hathor was highly revered in ancient Egypt, often associated with a golden age of peace and love. The myth of her destructive side shows a duality in the god's nature that was central to Egyptian thought. They could be both givers of life and bringers of death. As the days passed, Hathor's thirst for blood grew. She wasn't just punishing, she was enjoying it. She was in a frenzy, a state of divine bloodlust. It was a terrifying thing to witness. And Ra, watching from the heavens, began to feel a sliver of regret. He had asked for punishment, but this was becoming an extermination. The very purpose of his creation, to have a world filled with people to love and to rule, was being undone by his own command. The myth has a quirky, almost comical tidbit about how they stopped her. Ra realized he had to act fast. He couldn't just tell her to stop. Her rage was too great. So, he devised a plan. He ordered his priests to grind a massive amount of ochre, the red mineral pigment used in paint and cosmetics, and mix it with barley beer. They brewed thousands of gallons, enough to fill an entire field. The mixture, a blood-red color, was then poured over the land. Hathor, seeing the red liquid, mistook it for the blood of her victims. She lapped it up greedily, thinking she was continuing her bloody work. But the beer had a powerful effect. It made her drunk. Very, very drunk. She stumbled, her roar turning into a giggle, her fury melting into a gentle haze. She fell asleep in the field, a very sleepy lioness with a tummy full of boozy barley. When she awoke, her rage was gone, replaced by a sense of calm and a deep fondness for humanity. This act, of tricking the god of vengeance with beer, shows that even the most powerful deities could be outsmarted, and it provides a beautiful, if a little absurd, resolution to a very dark tale. With Ra's fury sated and Hathor's thirst for blood quenched with beer, a new age dawned. Ra, now much older and wiser from his near-catastrophic mistake, decided it was time to step back from the world. He retreated from the earth, ascending to the heavens to rule from his celestial boat, a daily voyage across the sky. He left humanity to govern itself, guided by the gods he had created. Among them were the 4 children of Jeb and Nut: Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. Osiris, the eldest, was chosen to be the ruler of the earth. He was a kind, wise, and benevolent king. He taught humanity the ways of civilization, how to cultivate the land, how to make wine from grapes, and how to create laws. Under his rule, Egypt became a paradise. The land was fertile, the people were prosperous, and peace reigned. Osiris's sister, the beautiful and powerful goddess Isis, was his wife and queen. Together, they were the perfect pair, a symbol of harmony and order. Their love and shared wisdom were the foundation of this new, peaceful era. But not everyone was happy. Osiris's younger brother, Set, was a god of chaos, deserts, and storms. He was a powerful and unpredictable force, and he was deeply, profoundly jealous of Osiris's success and his beloved wife, Isis. Set saw his brother's order as a limitation on his own wild power. He coveted Osiris's throne and his beautiful queen. Historians still argue whether Set's chaotic nature was an intrinsic part of his being or if it was a reaction to his own feelings of inadequacy in the face of Osiris's perfect rule. In either case, his jealousy festered like a desert wound. Set was not alone in his malevolence. Lurking in the shadows was a far more ancient and terrifying enemy, Apep, the great serpent of chaos. Apep was the embodiment of all that was evil and disorderly. He lived in the darkness of the underworld, trying every night to devour Ra's solar boat as it made its daily journey. While not directly involved in the mortal world's affairs, Apep's presence was a constant reminder that chaos was always just below the surface, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Set, in his jealousy, was becoming a vessel for this dark energy, a mortal-level embodiment of Apep's cosmic disruption. A curious tidbit is that even though Apep was the ultimate villain, the Egyptians didn't worship him or even try to appease him. Instead, they had elaborate rituals designed to curse and defeat him, a stark contrast to how they interacted with other, more ambiguous deities. Set's plan was cunning and cruel. He secretly had a beautiful chest made, a box crafted from the finest wood and decorated with gold and jewels. The chest was measured to fit only one person, Osiris. He then hosted a great banquet, a lavish feast to which all the gods were invited. As the night wore on and the wine flowed freely, Set unveiled his magnificent creation. "What a beautiful chest," the gods exclaimed. "I will give this chest to the person who fits inside it perfectly," Set announced with a sly smile. The gods, a mix of curious and competitive, eagerly took turns trying to fit into the chest. One after another, they were either too tall, too short, or too wide. The game continued until it was Osiris's turn. With a good-natured laugh, Osiris climbed inside. It was a perfect fit. He lay down, his body sinking comfortably into the padded interior. But as soon as he was inside, Set and his co-conspirators, who some myths say were his followers from the desert, slammed the lid shut. They sealed it with molten lead, trapping the benevolent king inside. The merriment of the banquet turned into a gasp of horror. The gods watched in stunned silence as Set's followers carried the sealed chest away. The world had gone from a paradise to a nightmare in a single, terrible moment. Set, in his triumph, had not just trapped his brother, he had set the stage for a conflict that would define the rest of Egyptian mythology. The harmony that Ra had created was shattered, and the age of peace was over. The journey was now about to get very, very dark. But don't worry, we'll get through it together. The chest, with Osiris still trapped inside, was carried out of the banquet hall by Set's conspirators. They didn't just stop at sealing him away, they threw the box into the Nile. The currents of the great river, which had once been a source of life and bounty under Osiris's rule, now became a silent accomplice in his murder. The chest was carried swiftly downstream, a dark secret bobbing on the surface of the tranquil water. It was a complete violation of all that was sacred, a betrayal that seeped into the very soil of Egypt. Word of the treachery spread like a wildfire, turning the once joyful land into a place of profound sorrow. The gods and humans alike were devastated, but none were more heartbroken than Isis. The moment she heard the news, her grief was all-consuming. She tore off her royal robes, dressed herself in mourning, and cut off her beautiful hair. She became a wanderer, a sorrowful goddess searching for her lost love. Her beloved sister, Nephthys, who was married to Set, was also horrified by her husband's actions and joined Isis in her quest. It's a powerful narrative. Two sisters, one the devoted wife, the other the betrayed one, united in their love for a fallen king. Isis, however, was not just a grieving widow. She was a goddess of immense power, a mistress of magic and spells. She had a cunning mind and an unyielding will. She refused to accept that her husband was simply gone. Her search began at the mouth of the Nile, where the chest had been cast. But the chest wasn't there. It had drifted out to sea, carried by the strong currents toward the Phoenician coast. A quirky tidbit is that in some versions of the myth, the chest washed ashore at the city of Byblos and became lodged in a tamarisk tree, which grew so rapidly around it that it enclosed the chest entirely, forming a magnificent pillar in the city's palace. This detail shows the deep connections between Egyptian mythology and the wider ancient Near East. Isis, with a determination that would put a modern-day detective to shame, followed the trail. She traveled far and wide, disguised as an old woman, asking everyone she met about the strange, beautiful pillar in Byblos. Her search was long and arduous. She didn't have Google Maps or a phone to call her friends. It was a literal globe-trotting journey on foot, a testament to her devotion. This story arc is a great example of a mainstream historical fact, that the cult of Isis was incredibly popular throughout the Hellenistic and Roman worlds. Long after the pharaonic period ended, her myth, her tireless devotion to her husband, resonated deeply with people across different cultures and became a major religious movement. Meanwhile, back in Egypt, the land was in turmoil. The Golden Age was over. The Nile's yearly flood, once so predictable and life-giving, became erratic. The crops failed, and the people suffered. This chaos was a direct result of Osiris's absence. His reign had brought order, and his death had brought, well, chaos. Set had seized the throne, but his rule was not like his brothers. He was a tyrannical king, ruling through fear and brute force. The desert crept into the fertile lands, and the gods, saddened by the state of things, mostly withdrew from the world. During her long journey, Isis stumbled upon a great secret. She learned that a young jackal-headed god, Anubis, was the son of Osiris. In a strange and complex turn of events, some myths say his mother was actually Nephthys, Osiris's sister and Set's wife, who had an affair with Osiris. Other versions say his mother was Isis. Historians still argue whether the original myths portrayed Anubis as a son of Ra, or if his parentage was reassigned to Osiris and Nephthys later to make him a more integral part of the Osiris myth cycle. Whatever the case, Anubis, a god of the dead and mummification, became an ally to Isis. He was an incredibly important figure. He wasn't evil or malicious, he was simply the guide for souls to the afterlife. It's a pretty significant role, right? A kind of cosmic tour guide. With Anubis's help, Isis finally reached Byblos and, through a clever ruse, retrieved the chest with Osiris's body still inside. She brought it back to Egypt, and for a short, beautiful moment, she had her husband back. But their peace was short-lived. Set, hearing that the body had been recovered, was enraged. He was a god of chaos, and the very idea of his brother's body being whole and at peace was an affront to his nature. He vowed to find it and destroy it for good. Set, fueled by rage and paranoia, launched a relentless search for the chest. He was not a patient god. He scoured the land, his eyes like blazing desert suns, his fury a tangible heat that caused the crops to wither and the ground to crack. The people of Egypt lived in terror, knowing that their tyrant king was on the hunt for something sacred, and that his wrath would spare no one. He finally found the hidden chest, which Isis had buried in a remote part of the Nile Delta. His discovery was a moment of pure, malevolent triumph. He didn't just open the chest this time, he desecrated it. He tore the body of his brother Osiris into 14 pieces. A slightly quirky tidbit is that some myths say the number of pieces was as many as 42. One for each nome, or province, of Egypt. The number of pieces might be a fun little trivia question, but the point is the same: the body was shattered. It was an act of ultimate malice, an attempt to make it impossible for Osiris to ever be whole again. To prevent his spirit from finding peace, Set scattered the pieces across the land, burying them in different locations so that Osiris's resurrection would be an impossible task. Isis, upon hearing the news of this second, more horrific crime, was once again plunged into despair. But her grief was short-lived. quickly replaced by a renewed, steely resolve. With her sister Nephthys and the ever-loyal Anubis, she began her second, more difficult quest. Her mission was to find every single piece of her husband's body. This was not a simple stroll in the park, it was an arduous, heartbreaking scavenger hunt across the entirety of Egypt. She traveled the length and breadth of the land, from the delta to the deserts, from the fields to the towns. Guided by her unwavering love and her powerful magic, she found the pieces one by one, each discovery a small victory against Set's malevolence. The head, an arm, a leg, every piece she found was a moment of bittersweet relief. A mainstream historical fact is that the various shrines and temples dedicated to Osiris were often said to be built on the spot where a piece of his body was found. This gave rise to the idea of holy pilgrimage sites and a deep connection between the sacred landscape of Egypt and the divine body of its first king. It's a powerful idea, really, that the land itself held a piece of its lost ruler. There was one piece, however, that she could not find. The 14th piece, the phallus, had been swallowed by a fish in the Nile. Because this piece was lost forever, Isis had to create a new one out of clay or wood. This detail is a little odd, a little funny, and a little sad. It's an important part of the myth because it shows that while she could work miracles, she couldn't reverse every tragedy. Historians still argue whether the loss of this specific piece was meant to signify the impossibility of a full resurrection, or if it was a symbolic way of showing that Osiris, as the lord of the afterlife, was no longer of this world and therefore did not need a physical body in its entirety. It's a very open-ended scholarly debate. Anubis, as the god of mummification, played a crucial role in this stage of the story. He was the one who helped Isis gather the pieces and then, with his magical skill, wrap the body in linen strips, performing the first act of mummification. This was the birth of the Egyptian funeral tradition. The process was not just about preserving a body, it was a magical ritual. A spell designed to protect the deceased and prepare them for the journey to the afterlife. It was a beautiful act of love and creation, a stark contrast to Set's act of destruction. And so, with the help of her sister and her son, Isis meticulously pieced her husband back together. The final piece of the puzzle, the one she had to craft herself, was a symbol of her unending devotion. She had defied a tyrant, traversed an entire country, and overcome the impossible. The stage was now set for the next chapter, the miracle of resurrection and the beginning of a new hope. Isis, with the last piece of Osiris's body in place, the one she had so painstakingly crafted herself, began her most powerful and ambitious magical act yet. With her sister Nephthys and the watchful Anubis at her side, she uttered a series of ancient spells. Weaving together her divine power and her immeasurable grief, she breathed life back into her husband's inanimate form. But Osiris wasn't reborn as a living king. He was something new, something more. This was not a simple act of resuscitation, it was the world's first ever resurrection. He rose not to rule the living, but to become the lord of the dead. With Anubis's help, Isis wrapped Osiris's body in linen bandages, and in doing so, created the very first mummy. This act was the foundation of the ancient Egyptian belief in the afterlife and the practice of mummification. A very mainstream historical fact is that mummification was a complex and expensive process. A ritual reserved mostly for pharaohs and the wealthy, all with the goal of ensuring a successful transition to the afterlife. It was a physical and symbolic act of preservation, a way to keep the body intact so that the soul could recognize it and return to it. Osiris, now a new kind of deity, was transformed. He was no longer the king of the earth, a position he had lost to his murderous brother. Instead, he was the king of the duat, the underworld. This wasn't a fiery hell or a dark, miserable place. It was a realm of stars and divine beings, a place of peace and judgment. He became the judge of souls, the one who would weigh the hearts of the deceased against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of truth and cosmic order. This is a crucial shift in the narrative. The hero is not simply restored to his former position but is elevated to a higher, more significant one. But Isis's magic had one more purpose. Before Osiris departed for the duat, she used her magic one last time to conceive a son with him. This was a miraculous and symbolic act, the last gasp of life from the god of the dead, a final seed of hope for a broken world. The son she would bear was Horus, the rightful heir to the throne, the one who would one day avenge his father and restore order to Egypt. Isis, now pregnant, went into hiding. She knew that Set would stop at nothing to eliminate any potential threat to his rule. She retreated to the marshy swamps of the Nile Delta, a place of seclusion and safety. A bit like hiding in a digital bunker where no one can find you. A quirky tidbit is that the delta was so dense with reeds and papyrus that it was considered almost impenetrable. The perfect refuge for a mother protecting her child from a vengeful god. She raised Horus there in secret, away from the prying eyes of Set. She was aided by several other gods and goddesses, who protected her and the child from Set's constant attempts to find them. The goddess of scorpions, Circe, was a notable helper, with her 7 scorpions acting as a bodyguard for the child Horus, protecting him from dangers in the wild. The story of Osiris's resurrection and his new role as the lord of the underworld is a pivotal moment. It establishes the central theme of Egyptian religion, the cycle of death and rebirth. Just as the sun dies each night and is reborn each morning, and the Nile floods recede and then return to bring life, so too does a life end only to begin anew in the afterlife. Historians still argue whether the concept of the afterlife was always so central to Egyptian belief, or if the myth of Osiris and his rebirth elevated its importance over time. It's a fundamental question about the evolution of their religious thought. So, while Osiris now ruled a kingdom of the dead, Isis and her young son, Horus, lived in the shadows. The world was still ruled by Set, the tyrant, but a flicker of hope had been born in the reeds of the delta. The stage was set for the final, epic confrontation that would determine the fate of Egypt, a showdown between a usurper and a rightful heir, between chaos and order. Isis raised Horus in the secluded marshlands of the Nile Delta, a world away from the tyranny of his uncle Set. She taught him about his father's greatness, about the peace and prosperity that had reigned before Set's usurpation, and about the deep, cosmic injustice that had been done. Horus grew not just in stature but in purpose. He was a child of vengeance and destiny, a divine avenger destined to set the world right again. He grew up strong. His eyes, one the sun, the other the moon, blazing with the righteousness of his cause. Set, meanwhile, ruled with an iron fist. His kingdom was a reflection of his chaotic nature. The deserts encroached on the fertile lands. The winds were harsh and unpredictable, and his subjects lived in fear. He had heard whispers of a child being raised in the delta, a son of Osiris. He sent his followers to search for Horus, to eliminate the threat before it could grow. But Isis, with her powerful magic and the help of other benevolent gods and animals, protected her son. In one tale, Horus, still a child, was stung by a scorpion, and Isis had to use her most powerful spells to save him, pleading with Ra to stop his solar boat until Horus was healed. This act showed not only her deep love but also the interconnectedness of all divine power. Finally, when Horus had come of age, he emerged from the delta, ready to reclaim his birthright. He was a handsome and courageous god, with the head of a falcon, a symbol of his celestial nature and his sharp, clear vision. He was the perfect physical and moral opposite of his brute of an uncle. He challenged Set to a duel, but this was no simple fistfight. This was a grand legal case, a trial for the throne of Egypt, presided over by the divine tribunal of the gods, the Ennead. The Ennead was a council of 9 gods, headed by Ra himself, who had a special interest in this case, seeing as it was a direct consequence of his decision to leave the world. This was the ultimate courtroom drama, a cosmic reality show. The whole pantheon was watching. Historians still argue about the composition of the Ennead and whether it was a fixed group or if its members changed over time. But the core idea of a divine court of justice is a constant in the myths. A very mainstream historical fact is that the ancient Egyptians believed that justice and truth were cornerstones of the universe, and the gods, even in their disputes, had to adhere to them. The trial was long and complicated, full of arguments and counter-arguments. Horus made his case, eloquently speaking of his father's righteous rule and Set's heinous crimes. He appealed to the gods' sense of justice and order, of Ma'at. Set, on the other hand, argued with bluster and force. He claimed that Horus was a mere child, a product of a secret union, and that he, Set, was the stronger, more capable ruler. He bragged about his power, his dominance, and his ability to control the untamed forces of the desert. He was essentially a cosmic playground bully, but a very powerful one. The gods were divided. Some, like Thoth, the god of wisdom, and Shu, the god of air, sided with Horus. They were proponents of order and justice. Others, like Ra himself, hesitated. Ra was an old god, and he saw Set's raw power as necessary for maintaining the balance of the cosmos. He believed that Horus was too young and perhaps too soft to rule a world filled with chaos. This indecision is a key part of the myth, showing that even the highest authority could be swayed by different arguments. The debate was fierce and went on for 80 years, which sounds like an eternity. But for a group of immortal beings, it was just a long, drawn-out legal battle. A slightly quirky tidbit is that the gods would sometimes get so fed up with the bickering that they would take a break. During one such break, Isis, still her cunning self, came up with a plan to sway the gods in her son's favor. An act of brilliant, if somewhat deceptive, maternal devotion. The stage was set for a series of duels and magical contests that would test the limits of both Horus and Set. The fate of Egypt hung in the balance, and this time, the gods would not be sitting on the sidelines. The divine court had reached a stalemate. Ra, the head of the tribunal, was still hesitant to award the throne to Horus, seeing him as too young and inexperienced. The bickering between the gods was getting out of hand. So, to break the deadlock, the gods decided to let the two rivals settle the matter in a series of magical contests. This was a common way for gods to resolve their disputes in Egyptian mythology. It wasn't about who was stronger in a fight, but who was more clever, more cunning, and more magically adept. It was a battle of wits and wills. The first contest was a boat race. But these weren't just any boats, they were made of stone. The first one to paddle across a body of water would be the victor. Horus, ever the clever one, knew he couldn't simply push a giant stone across the water. So, he made a boat out of pine wood, but he painted it to look exactly like stone. A quirky little detail here shows how the myths could be both grand and a bit silly. It's a bit like a prank you'd pull on a sibling, but on a cosmic scale. Set, on the other hand, a god of brute force and impatience, decided to build his boat out of a huge boulder. It was a good idea on paper, but in practice, as soon as he pushed it into the water, it promptly sank. Horus, of course, sailed across the lake easily in his disguised wooden boat, a smug look on his face. Set, in a fit of rage, turned into a hippopotamus and attacked Horus's boat, smashing it to pieces. The gods had to intervene and call an end to the contest, with no clear winner declared, but with Horus's intelligence and Set's short temper on full display. Another one of the contests was a battle of transformations. The two gods would turn into different animals and fight to see who was superior. This contest was all about raw power and magical skill. They transformed into a variety of creatures, from falcons to hippos to crocodiles, each form showcasing a different aspect of their divine nature. The fights were brutal, and a little on the PG-13 side of a cosmic brawl. But no matter who they turned into, neither could land a decisive blow. Historians still argue whether the various forms taken by the gods were meant to represent different aspects of their power, or if they were a way to explain the different animal-headed gods in the pantheon. The gods, tired of the constant fighting and the lack of a clear winner, decided to take a break on an island. Ra, frustrated with the whole thing, forbade anyone from talking to Isis, knowing she would try to help her son. But Isis was a master of disguise and a mistress of deception. She turned herself into an old woman, frail and stooped, and managed to trick the ferryman into taking her to the island. When she arrived, she saw Set sitting alone, stewing in his anger. She approached him, pretending to be a distraught widow whose son had been robbed of his cattle by a powerful stranger. She wept and told a heart-wrenching story of a brave shepherd boy who was robbed of his inheritance by an evil man. Set, in a rare moment of sympathy, or more likely, arrogance, listened to her tale. Who would do such a thing? He asked, not realizing he was talking to his own sister. This stranger has no right to take your son's inheritance, he declared. Isis, still in her disguise, then revealed her true identity. You have just judged yourself, she exclaimed. You have no right to take my son's inheritance from him. Set, realizing he had been duped, was absolutely furious. He stormed back to the tribunal and demanded that Isis be punished for her deception. The gods, seeing the irony and the justice of the situation, sided with Horus. A mainstream historical fact is that the goddess Isis was highly revered for her cleverness and magical prowess. And this story, in which she outwits even a powerful god, cemented her reputation as a powerful and protective mother figure. It was a victory not of strength, but of wit and love. Set, enraged by Isis's clever deception, was not about to give up. The gods had ruled against him, but he believed that brute force and cunning were more important than justice. He challenged Horus to one final, decisive battle. This was not a test of wits or a silly boat race. This was a winner-takes-all fight to the death. The gods agreed, for they were tired of the centuries-long conflict. They wanted a final resolution, an end to the chaos that had plagued the world since Osiris's murder. The final battle took place in the form of two mighty animals. Horus, the Avenger, took the form of a falcon, a symbol of his celestial nature, his keen eyesight, and his swift justice. Set, the god of chaos, transformed into a great hippopotamus, a creature known for its immense power, its ferocity, and its unpredictable nature. The two titans clashed in a battle that shook the very foundations of the earth. The sky darkened, the winds howled, and the Nile itself churned with the fury of their fight. Horus, with the speed of the wind, swooped down on Set, his talons sharp and his beak ready to strike. Set, with the force of a tidal wave, charged at Horus, his massive jaws snapping and his thick hide impervious to most attacks. The battle raged for days, a blur of feathers and hide, of swift strikes and crushing blows. Horus managed to land a decisive blow, tearing off one of Set's testicles. This injury was a symbol of Set's lost virility and his eventual defeat. A slightly quirky tidbit is that in some versions of the myth, Horus's eyes were injured or even lost during the battle. This led to the creation of the Eye of Horus amulet, a powerful symbol of protection and healing. This amulet, known as the Wedjot, was one of the most common and powerful symbols in ancient Egypt. A mainstream historical fact is that the Eye of Horus was a very popular good luck charm, worn by both the living and the dead to ward off evil and ensure good health. But Set was not one to give up easily. He managed to strike a blow against Horus, tearing out one of his eyes. This was a critical moment. Without his eye, Horus was weakened, but he was not defeated. Thoth, the god of wisdom and magic, intervened and restored Horus's eye, a magical act that healed the wound and restored the cosmic order. Historians still argue whether the eye was lost and found, or if it was restored by magic. Regardless, the eye became a powerful symbol of healing and wholeness. It's a great example of a divine intervention. The final blow came when Horus, with his eye restored, managed to pin Set to the ground. He had him, but he didn't kill him. He brought him before the divine tribunal, before Ra himself, to get a final verdict. It was a moment of grace, of justice, of cosmic order. Horus had the power to kill his uncle, but he chose to let the gods decide, to prove that his rule would be one of law and order, not of vengeance and chaos. The gods, seeing Horus's strength, his wisdom, and his unwavering commitment to justice, finally made their decision. They awarded the throne to Horus. The long, drawn-out conflict was over. Order was restored. The world, which had been in a state of turmoil, could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Horus, the rightful heir, was crowned king of Egypt. He became the first human pharaoh, a living embodiment of the divine ruler on earth. His reign was a return to the golden age of his father, a time of peace, prosperity, and cosmic harmony. The reign of chaos was over, and the reign of order had begun, with the final verdict delivered and Horus crowned as the new king. The other gods of the pantheon could finally settle into their established roles in the newly reordered cosmos. The long, drawn-out family drama was over, and it was time for everyone to get back to work. Each god had a specific function, a job that was essential to the daily functioning of the universe as the Egyptians understood it. This system of divine specialization is a mainstream historical fact, a key part of how the ancient Egyptians conceptualized their world. It was a cosmic bureaucracy, and every god had a specific department. First, there was Thoth, the god of wisdom, knowledge, writing, and magic. He was often depicted as an ibis or a baboon, and he was the one who had helped to restore Horus's eye. Thoth was the ultimate librarian, a cosmic know-it-all who was responsible for recording everything that happened. He was the one who kept the divine records and, as such, was an essential part of the justice system in the afterlife. He was the one who wrote down the verdict of the weighing of the heart ceremony. A crucial part of the Egyptian journey to the afterlife. A slightly quirky tidbit is that Thoth was also the god of the moon, and the phases of the moon were believed to be a reflection of his own magical work. Then there was Maat, the goddess of truth, justice, and cosmic order. She was the one who represented the fundamental balance of the universe. Her symbol was a single ostrich feather, the same feather that was used to weigh the hearts of the deceased in the afterlife. If your heart was lighter than the feather, you were considered righteous and were allowed to pass into the peaceful afterlife. If it was heavier, it meant your soul was burdened with sin and you would be devoured by the monster Ammit, a creature that was part crocodile, part lion, and part hippopotamus. This idea of a cosmic balance, of a universal order that even the gods had to follow, was central to Egyptian thought. Historians still argue whether the concept of Maat was a religious concept or a philosophical one, or if the two were intertwined in a way we no longer understand. We also have Hathor, whom you remember from our earlier section. After her destructive phase, she returned to being a more benevolent goddess of love, music, and motherhood. She was a powerful and popular deity, a symbol of the joy of life. And there was Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of war and healing, a dual role that reflected the Egyptian belief that destruction and creation were two sides of the same coin. The gods also had a very personal, daily role in the lives of the ancient Egyptians. The gods of the home, like Bes and Taweret, were worshipped by common people to protect their families, their homes, and their children. They were the kind of gods you could talk to every day. The ones who were a part of your daily life. They were a reminder that the divine was not just in the heavens, but also in the mundane, in the everyday. Finally, we have the gods who were responsible for the afterlife, the ones who would guide the deceased on their final journey. We have Osiris, the new king of the underworld, the ultimate judge of souls. We have Anubis, the god of mummification and the guide of the dead. Their roles were not just about death, they were about a new beginning. A new life in the peaceful fields of Aru, the Egyptian paradise. The Egyptian pantheon was a vast and complex family, a system of interconnected roles and responsibilities. The end of the Horus-Set conflict marked the beginning of their official post-creation roles, a time when the universe was in a state of order, and the gods, both great and small, were in their rightful places. With the pantheon in order and Horus now ruling on Earth, the universe had a rhythm, a cycle that governed all things. At the heart of this cosmic machine was Ra, the sun god himself, now a distant, yet ever-present, force. His journey was a daily reminder of the constant cycle of life, death, and rebirth that was so central to Egyptian belief. Every day, Ra made his journey across the sky in his solar boat, a magnificent vessel that brought light and life to the world. A mainstream historical fact is that the journey of the sun god across the sky was the most important religious concept in ancient Egypt, a ritual that was performed every single day. This belief was so powerful that it influenced every aspect of Egyptian life, from their art to their architecture. But what happened when the sun went down? As Ra's boat reached the western horizon, it was swallowed by the darkness. It was a symbolic death, a descent into the duat, the underworld. This was not a place of fire and brimstone, but a realm of stars and ancient gods. And of course, our old friend, Osiris, the Lord of the Dead. This nightly journey was fraught with peril. The boat had to pass through a series of gates, each one guarded by a different monster or challenge. The most significant threat was Apep, the great serpent of chaos, who lived in the deepest, darkest part of the underworld. Every night, Apep would try to swallow Ra's boat, to plunge the world into eternal darkness. But Ra was not alone. The gods who were a part of his crew, including the cunning Set, would fight off the serpent, ensuring that the sun would rise again. It's a slightly quirky tidbit that Set, who was once the villain, now had a crucial role in defending Ra and the cosmos. He was a god of chaos. Yes, but he was a necessary chaos, a force that could be used for good. The journey through the underworld was a symbolic representation of the human journey through death and into the afterlife. Just as Ra's soul, his Ba, would leave his body at night and journey through the duat, so too would the souls of the deceased. They would have to navigate the same perils, face the same monsters, and ultimately, appear before Osiris, the judge of the dead. This is where the concept of the weighing of the heart comes in. A ceremony in which the deceased's heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'a, the goddess of truth and order. If the heart was light, the person was considered righteous and would pass into the fields of Aru, the Egyptian paradise. If it was heavy, it would be devoured by the monster Ammit, and the soul would be lost forever. The cycle of life, death, and rebirth was not just for the gods, it was for all of creation. The Nile, the lifeblood of Egypt, would recede and then flood again, bringing life to the parched land. The crops would grow, be harvested, and then replanted, a constant rhythm of renewal. The pharaoh, the living Horus on earth, would die and be reborn in the body of the next pharaoh. This constant cycle of renewal was the foundation of the Egyptian worldview. A belief that even in the face of death, there was always a promise of new life. Historians still argue whether the Egyptian afterlife was a privilege for the few or a possibility for everyone. But the core idea of a cosmic cycle of renewal was universal. It was a belief that brought comfort and meaning to their lives. A sense that even in the face of the unknown, there was a plan, a divine order that would guide them. The myths we have discussed were not just stories, they were a roadmap for life. A guide to a peaceful and eternal existence after death. The myths we've been exploring weren't just bedtime stories for the ancient Egyptians. They were a blueprint for their lives. Their entire society was structured around these divine narratives, a belief system that permeated every aspect of their existence, from the pharaoh on his throne to the humblest farmer in the field. Everyone had a role to play in maintaining the cosmic order that the gods had established. A mainstream historical fact is that the pharaoh was considered the living embodiment of Horus, the earthly ruler who maintained the balance between the divine and mortal realms. This belief gave the pharaoh absolute power and authority, making him not just a political leader, but a religious one as well. This divine order, called Ma'a, was the central principle of Egyptian life. It was a concept that encompassed truth, justice, harmony, and balance. It was the very opposite of chaos, or Isfet. The goal of every Egyptian, from the moment they were born until the moment they died, was to live a life in accordance with Ma'a. This wasn't just about following rules, it was about living with a sense of purpose and a deep respect for the natural order of things. A slightly quirky tidbit is that even the Egyptian legal system was based on Ma'a, with judges being called priests of Ma'a, and their judgments being seen as an act of divine justice. It's a pretty profound concept. Really, the rituals and ceremonies that the Egyptians performed every day were a way of reinforcing this cosmic order. The priests would perform elaborate ceremonies in the temples, reenacting the myths of the gods, all with the goal of ensuring that the sun would rise again, that the Nile would flood on time, and that the crops would grow. These rituals were not just for the gods, they were for the people. They provided a sense of security and a connection to the divine. But the most significant part of their daily life, the one that was most influenced by the myths, was their preparation for death. The Egyptians believed that death was not an end, but a transition, a journey to a new life. The elaborate funeral rituals, the mummification, and the burial in tombs were all a way of ensuring a successful transition. The myths of Osiris and his resurrection provided them with a roadmap for their own journey. Just as Osiris had died and been reborn as the Lord of the afterlife, so too could they. The tombs themselves were filled with everything a person would need in the afterlife. From food and drink to furniture and servants, in the form of little statues called ushavti. The walls were covered with spells and incantations from the Book of the Dead, a guide to navigating the perilous underworld. This was not a book you read, it was a book you were buried with. A kind of cosmic instruction manual for the journey to the afterlife. Historians still argue whether the Book of the Dead was a set of universal instructions or a personalized guide for each individual. But the core idea of a magical roadmap to the afterlife is a fascinating one. The Egyptians' lives were guided by these myths, a constant reminder that the order they saw in the world was not accidental, it was a divine gift. one that needed to be protected and maintained. Their daily lives were a testament to their unwavering belief in the power of the gods and the promise of a peaceful, eternal existence after death. It's a beautiful thought, really. A society built on the idea that every action, no matter how small, was a part of a larger, cosmic plan. The final, and perhaps most important, piece of the Egyptian mythological puzzle is the concept of death and the afterlife. The myths we have explored, from Osiris's murder to his resurrection, were not just stories about gods, they were a roadmap for the deceased. A guide to a peaceful and eternal existence after death. The Egyptians believed that a person was made up of several parts. Not just a body. There was the physical body, the Ka, the life force, and the Ba, the soul. The ultimate goal was to ensure that the Ka and Ba could reunite in the afterlife. A journey that began the moment a person took their last breath. The funeral rituals, which were a direct reflection of Isis's actions, were a crucial part of this process. The process of mummification, as pioneered by Anubis and Isis, was a way to preserve the body so that the Ka could recognize it and return to it. The body was carefully prepared. The internal organs were removed and placed in canopic jars, and the body was wrapped in linen bandages. This was not just a scientific process, it was a magical one. A ritual that was believed to protect the body and prepare it for the journey ahead. A mainstream historical fact is that mummification was a very complex process that could take up to 70 days. A testament to the importance the Egyptians placed on the afterlife. The journey to the afterlife was fraught with peril. The deceased would have to navigate the underworld, the Duat, a realm of darkness and monsters. The tombs, which were often elaborate and filled with treasures, were not just a place to store the body, they were a kind of magical passport. A guide to the afterlife. The walls were covered with spells and incantations from the Book of the Dead, a collection of magical texts designed to help the deceased navigate the perils of the underworld. It's a slightly quirky tidbit that the Book of the Dead was not a single book but a collection of spells that were often custom-made for the individual. A kind of personalized instruction manual for the afterlife. The ultimate test came at the end of the journey, when the deceased would enter the Hall of Two Truths and stand before Osiris, the judge of the dead. Here, the weighing of the heart ceremony would take place. The heart of the deceased was placed on one side of a scale, and on the other, the feather of Ma'a, the goddess of truth and order. The god Thoth would be there to record the verdict. If the heart was light, it meant the person had lived a righteous life. In accordance with Ma'a, they would be allowed to pass into the fields of Aru, the Egyptian paradise, a place of peace and plenty. But if the heart was heavy, it would be devoured by Ammit, the monster with the head of a crocodile, the body of a lion, and the hindquarters of a hippopotamus. This was the ultimate punishment. The complete annihilation of the soul. A fate worse than death. Historians still argue whether the concept of the afterlife was a way to enforce moral behavior in the living, or if it was a genuine belief in a new and better existence. But whatever the reason, the myths of death and resurrection provided the Egyptians with a sense of comfort and purpose. They believed that death was not an end, but a transition, a new beginning in a world of peace and eternal happiness. The entire tapestry of their lives, from their daily work to their grandest architectural feats, was a testament to this unwavering belief. It's a beautiful thought, a society built on the idea that every action, no matter how small, was a part of a larger, cosmic plan. With the stories of the gods now complete, let's step back and look at the bigger picture. The entire Egyptian mythological world, from the creation of the universe to the daily journey of the sun, was a grand, beautiful, and sometimes terrifying tapestry of interconnected tales. It was a story that gave meaning to their lives and a purpose to their deaths. The core of it was a constant, almost hypnotic, rhythm of cosmic renewal. The Egyptians saw this cycle everywhere, in the rising and setting of the sun, in the yearly flooding and receding of the Nile, and in the growth and harvest of crops. The sun god Ra, in his daily journey, was the ultimate symbol of this cycle. He was born from the waters of Nun in the morning, a fiery child of the cosmos. He would grow in strength and majesty throughout the day, reaching his peak at noon. And then, as the day waned, he would grow old and weak, finally dying as he sank below the western horizon. But his death was not an end. It was a transition, a journey through the dark and dangerous underworld. The duat, where he would fight off the forces of chaos and be reborn in the morning. This cycle, this constant death and rebirth, was the foundation of the Egyptian worldview. This idea was also mirrored in the story of Osiris. He was a king of the earth who was murdered and dismembered. But he was not truly gone. He was resurrected and reborn as the Lord of the afterlife. A new and powerful role. His story was a promise, a reassurance to the Egyptians that death was not a final end, but a transition to a new existence. It's a powerful idea, a comforting thought that even in the face of the unknown, there is always a promise of new life. A mainstream historical fact is that this cyclical worldview was unique to ancient Egypt. Unlike other ancient cultures that saw time as linear, with a clear beginning and end, the Egyptians saw time as a circular, eternal process of renewal. This belief was so deeply ingrained that it influenced their art, their architecture, and their daily rituals. The pyramids, for example, were not just tombs, they were cosmic machines designed to help the pharaoh on his journey to the afterlife. To join the gods in their eternal cycle. The myths also provided a moral compass for the Egyptians. The concept of Ma'at, of truth, justice, and cosmic order, was the guiding principle of their lives. The stories of Horus and Set, of the struggle between order and chaos, taught them that a life of righteousness would ultimately triumph over one of malice. This wasn't just a religious belief, it was a philosophical one. A way of understanding the universe and their place in it. Historians still argue whether the Egyptian belief in an eternal cycle of renewal was a source of comfort or a kind of cosmic fatalism. But the fact remains that it was the bedrock of their civilization. It was a beautiful and complex tapestry of stories that gave meaning to their lives and a purpose to their deaths. Now, as the final journey of the sun god begins, let's drift off with the comforting thought that even in darkness, there is always the promise of a new dawn. The myths we've explored are a beautiful, complex tapestry, a world where gods are both creators and destroyers, where love can conquer death, and where chaos is a necessary part of the cosmic order. But these stories were more than just a grand narrative, they were a roadmap for life. A guidebook for a society that was deeply connected to the divine. The Egyptians' daily lives were a testament to their unwavering belief in a cosmos guided by the gods. A place where every action, no matter how small, was a part of a larger, divine plan. Their religious beliefs were not confined to temples, they were woven into the very fabric of their homes, their fields, and their social structures. The gods of the household, like the dwarf god Bes and the hippopotamus goddess Taweret, were worshipped with small statues and amulets, a reminder that the divine was always watching over their families and their children. A mainstream historical fact is that personal religious practice, separate from the official state religion, was a major part of ancient Egyptian life, with people seeking the protection and guidance of their favorite gods in their daily routines. The pharaoh, as the living embodiment of Horus, was the bridge between the human and divine worlds. He was responsible for maintaining Ma'at, the cosmic balance, by performing rituals, building temples, and leading his people in a way that honored the gods. His every act was a sacred one, a way of ensuring that the sun would rise, that the Nile would flood, and that the world would not fall into chaos. The grand temples, the magnificent pyramids, and the towering statues were not just monuments to his power, they were acts of devotion. A way of giving thanks to the gods for the order they had created. The Egyptians' lives were also a constant preparation for death, which they viewed not as an end, but as a journey to a new and better existence. The elaborate funeral rituals, the painstaking mummification, and the magical spells from the Book of the Dead were all a way of ensuring a successful transition. They believed that by following the example of Osiris, who had died and been reborn as the Lord of the afterlife, they too could achieve eternal life. This belief gave them a sense of purpose and a profound comfort in the face of death. A slightly quirky tidbit is that even the very tools and objects of daily life, from combs to sandals, were often placed in tombs. A sign that the afterlife was seen not as an ethereal, spiritual place, but as a real, physical continuation of their lives. Historians still argue whether the Egyptian belief in the afterlife was a way to control the populace or a genuine source of hope. But the fact remains that it was the bedrock of their civilization. It was a beautiful and complex system that gave meaning to their lives, a sense of purpose to their deaths, and a deep connection to the universe around them. As we end our journey through this world of gods and magic, I invite you to drift off with the comforting thought that even in the face of the unknown, there is always the promise of a new dawn. Close your eyes. Let the soft hum of the fan and the memory of the Nile's gentle currents ease your mind. The stories of the sun god's daily journey through the underworld remind us that even after the darkest night, the light will always return.